Okay, cool.
Find you all safe and well in these strange and difficult times. My name is Peter Maravellis, and on behalf of City Lights Booksellers, I'd like to welcome you to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that continues in the footsteps of our in-store calendar during the shelter in place. We continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with readings, discussions, forums throughout the fall season. So we're happy to announce that City Lights has actually reopened its doors to the public. In case you don't know, following San Francisco Health Department guidelines, we aim to make your visit as safe as possible. Please do come down and visit us. You'll be able to once again browse our stacks. Our business hours are 7 days a week from 12 noon to 8 p.m. So we've worked very hard to transform the store for the age of COVID. The entrance is now on the Broadway side of the building. It's 271 Columbus, and the original entrance is an exit only. So we encourage everyone, please do wear facial covering while visiting. We're trying to make all of our efforts to keep safe everyone. So as many of you know, City Lights is a publishing house as well as a bookstore. We continue to publish in the grand tradition of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's seminal Pocket Poets series, continue to produce on a seasonal basis new books of poetry, fiction, literature, and so on and so forth. We have new titles coming out from David Barsamian, from Stan Cox, a very timely book from Alan Hirsch about our current electoral crisis, and also new books from the 21st Poet Laureate of the United States, Juan Felipe Herrera, as well as new poetry. So if you want to learn more about the books we publish, as well as the books that we carry, you can come up to our website, www.citylights.com. You can also keep an eye on our social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. We're on it. So I'd like to welcome you all to Lonely Arts Club Band, a celebration of Zoetrope All Stories Fall 2020 issue. Founded by Francis Ford Coppola in 1997, Zoetrope All Story is an award-winning quarterly print magazine of short fiction, one-act plays, photography, art, essays, and so on. It is amongst one of those celebrated literary periodicals in the world, and essentially kind of a meeting place where literature, film, and the arts all intersect. They've had such writers grace their pages as Margaret Atwood, Colin McCann, Daniel Alarcon, Ha Jin, Haruki Murakami, and the list goes on. And they do this wonderful thing where they have this tradition of inviting guest editors to design each issue. So they've had everyone from Agnes Varda to David Lynch, PJ Harvey to Gus Van Sant. Even Lawrence Ferlinghetti himself had a crack at it, had an honor of working on an issue. So we're very lucky indeed to have them as neighbors. Zoetrope HQ is located just down the street from City Lights. So tonight takes on a very special meaning as we enjoy this very neighborly celebration. So just to remind you, we're going to be posting links if you want to purchase copies of the new issue. So please keep your eye on the chat function. That is easily activated by the dashboard on the lower part of your screen. You can also use it to post comments, and we're going to use it for the Q&A at the end. So please do make your little statements and comments and kind words. So the current issue has been designed by filmmaker Kelly Reichardt, and we're really very, very honored to have with us tonight 3 of the contributors of the current issue: Frances de Pontes Peebles, Patrick Dacey, and Daniel Orozco. We also have with us managing editor Manuela Martin. And to get the program started, I'd like to welcome editor-in-chief of Zoetrope All Story, our very dear friend, Michael Ray. Welcome to City Lights Live.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and to see all these faces. I keep seeing like a bunch of friends I haven't seen in a long time, kind of scrolling across the bottom. So if I get a little distracted, I apologize, but I'll keep my focus and professionalism. But my name is Michael Ray. I'm the editor of Zoetrope All Story. I'm presently away from our headquarters in San Francisco, quarantined at my in-laws' place in Memphis. And I am so supremely thrilled to welcome what seems to be millions of you. I do feel like there are probably a million celebrants out there with us tonight, to the virtual release fete for the fall 2020 edition of the magazine, which was designed by Kelly Reichardt. I have my copy here. It is supremely, super lovely. I'm doubly thrilled to introduce my colleague, the magazine's managing editor, Manjula Martin, who's zooming in from the Redwoods in Camp Meeker, California. Hi, Em. Say hi to everyone out there.
It's so great to be here. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Peter. We miss the store and miss the neighborhood so much.
Yes, that's true. I'm gonna introduce everyone else first before we turn to, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm triply thrilled to welcome our contributors to the edition. the illuminating Frances de Pontes Peebles in Chicago, the revelatory Patrick Dacey in Newport News, Virginia.
Hi, everybody.
And the man in the happiest shirt tonight and also earning my vote is the friendliest person in Idaho, with apologies to Tony Doerr, Daniel Orozco in Moscow, Idaho. Hello, Daniel.
Thank you. Hello, Michael.
And our designer, the acclaimed filmmaker Kelly Reichardt, would be with us too, were it not for her own Zoom overload, as she's teaching this semester at Bard in the Hudson Valley while I holed up in her apartment in Portland, Oregon. And so I was mentioning earlier that we're representing, I guess, almost every time zone in the contiguous U.S. today. But Manjula, can you tell us a bit about Kelly's design of the issue and how the two of you went from like-minded strangers to BFFs forever?
Absolutely. As Peter mentioned, we're not just a literary magazine. Zoetrope is also an art magazine. For each edition of the magazine, we invite a prominent artist to be our guest designer, which means they contribute the imagery for the entire issue. It also means they oversee the whole look and the feel of the edition. As subscribers know, every issue looks a little bit different. And as a print-only publication, we consider that to be one of the special things that we're doing, and it's important to us that we're creating sort of like an art object in addition to really amazing stories. So we were fortunate to work with Kelly Reichardt on this issue. For those of you not familiar with her films, she is one of the most amazing, innovative, independent filmmakers working today. Her films include Night Moves, Meek's Cutoff, Wendy and Lucy, Old Joy, and most recently, First Cow, which premiered at the New York Film Festival this spring, just on the cusp of the pandemic. So when we reached out to Kelly to invite her to design the magazine, we sort of assumed that she might contribute photography or stills from the sets of her films, the types of things that other filmmakers have contributed in the past. But she really surprised me by saying, oh, hey, I have these drawings. Do you guys want to look at them? And she sent me this folder of amazing, vivid, lovely colored pencil portraits. And these are what ended up in the issue. And they're works that she's never shown publicly before. I'm just gonna hold this up. I don't know if folks can see it. Here's the cover. And some of these portraits are just really amazing. Apologies for the light glare. What Kelly has done is, and in the magazine, there's an introductory essay in which she sort of explains all this. But basically she was on press tour for First Cow in March. And the word that the shelter in place was happening came down, and they canceled the press tour and sent her home to Portland, Oregon, where she lives. She was out sort of doing the pandemic panic grocery shopping before the shelter in place. And she happened to sort of on a whim stop by an art supply store and picked up some colored pencils and a bunch of tracing paper. And she just started drawing and tracing photographs and pictures from magazines and art books. It wasn't something she'd ever really done before. And a lot of images of her friends and family and sort of her community during this very remarkable time that then quickly evolved into the Black Lives Matter protests in Oregon. And she sort of managed to capture all these amazing, really intimate snapshots in her lovely sort of illustrated way. The artwork itself is gorgeous, as is the design. Kelly, is a filmmaker. She has an impeccable sense of artistry, and we're very grateful to her for, the way the issue came together and for allowing us to showcase these amazing personal images. I think these drawings are a really stunning example of how, creative artists can be under very unusual circumstances and find ways to keep making art. Kelly herself was out of work. She's both a teacher and a filmmaker during the initial phases of the lockdown. And so many artists of all types have been put out of work by this pandemic, and many of them have found surprising new ways to keep making art. Like if you're an acclaimed filmmaker and you suddenly take up drawing with colored pencils. So I encourage you all to order a copy of the magazine so you can hold it in your hands and look at Kelly's amazing artwork. As Michael mentioned, she couldn't be here tonight. And I also just have to say, if you're not familiar with her films, please seek them out. She is a true genius of the genre. So I'll turn it back to Michael and the other literary geniuses who are in the magazine.
Thanks, Manjulin. Yeah, as it happens, that was one of the first stops canceled on Kelly's press tour. I think she was in Cambridge at the Harvard Film Archive at the time, and she was supposed to come to San Francisco. I was going to interview her at the Roxy Theater, and it did not happen. But let's turn to the stories. So we're going to move through the issue in the way in the order that they appear. So first, we're going to go to Frances de Pontes Peebles. This is Frances's fourth story that we've been so supremely fortunate to publish. The earlier three are really among the apex ever to appear on our pages. Frances is always someone, when people say, whom should I be reading? I say Frances, and Manjula can attest to this. Her work is, I mean, you'll see tonight, it's incredible. So the first was was 15 years ago. In the winter of 2005, The Disappearance of Luisa Porto, which appeared in that winter 2005 edition that was designed by the musician and actor Tom Waits. Then in the spring 2011 release that was designed by the filmmaker Mark Romanek, we published Frances's story, The Sarambi Case, which is, I mean, again, I'm just becoming sort of redundant, but it's like a Terrence Malick film in short story. It's incredible. And then The Crossing, which is just a completely eviscerating story, which was in our winter 2014-2015 issue about a young woman making her way across the US-Mexico border. That was designed by the musician Bill Callahan. I mean, all three are just incredible. So Frances's story in this edition is called Girls of the Immortal Garden. It leads the issue. And Frances, will you kick us off?
Thank you so much, Michael. That makes me feel so just incredible. And I love being in Zoetrope, and it's just such it's really special that my stories can have their home in this magazine, which is just an amazing place to be. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'm not going to give too many explanations. I'm just going to jump right into reading a little bit of the story, and hopefully just hearing it, everyone will kind of understand what's going on. And thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. I really appreciate you being here. Okay, so Girls of the Immortal Garden. Joanna Diachki, created 1971. I am his first. Because of this, he regards me with nostalgia and disdain. I'm evidence of his youthful drive and its clumsiness. I'm proof of his evolution. He has advanced while I have stayed exactly the same. I have vague memories of being shapeless, a lump of clay without vision or sense. He molded me under his hands, so large and smooth-skinned back then, not the withered talons they are today, holding tight to a cane as he shuffles back and forth from the immortal garden to the indoor gallery, ignoring me, though I hold a place of honor, a pedestal at the museum's entrance, where every paying guest and reporter and artistic ingenue must reckon with me face to face. I'm not his best. There are others here who are finer specimens, more complex, more illustrative of his devastating talent, but I've earned my place at the front. When he made me, he already considered himself old, a man in his 40s playing at creation, a rebel son who took up art instead of business, returning reluctantly from decades studying art abroad to his birth city, a backwater among backwaters, as he called it, the swamp where he'd been relegated to rot. But in this swamp was money, his father's, and an abandoned tile factory, his grandfather's, and clay, so rich and pure that only the highest temperatures can harden it to near stone. Slowly, he pieced me together, first a pillar, then a chest, a neck, and a face, blank. I felt his breath hot on the cheek that he'd formed, Delicately, with the tips of his fingers, he gave me ears. I could hear the morning calls of birds, the frantic scuttling of lizards. Midday was quiet, except for the echoes of his steps in the vast space. He shaped me a nose, and I could smell the smoke of his cigarettes, and behind it, my own scent of earth and metal. My eyes were carved with a sharp, pointed tool. And then I saw him, his face kissing distance away. His black hair rose in a wave from his forehead. His features were all hard angles and rigid lines, except for his lips, as soft and curved as the clay he rolled between his fingers. And his eyes, so dark and shining they appeared painted and glazed, focused on me with rapt attention. Being seen like this, one comes to life. I was not made in a day. He struggled with me. At first, there was a rush of naive confidence. There was music and laughter. I was admired. In his atelier, ancient-looking mirrors, their gilding peeling and stained, were propped against every wall and table so that he could see me from all angles. I, in turn, could see my own transformation. My nose was smashed and remade. My long hair was replaced by a spiked helmet. I had a shield, and then bare breasts, and then a shield again. Once he held my face in his hands and looked at me with such rapture, such tenderness, I believed it to be love. A day later, he poured water over me and pressed my eyes into their sockets. He pummeled my cheeks and chin until I was nothing but a clot on a neck. I was left this way, alone, sightless, feeling the light turn to dark and then to light again. I urged myself to remember where I was, the giant factory room with a peaked ceiling of wood and red tile. Dust sprinkled over me. Geckos scurried about, their tiny scaled feet scratching what was once my face. And then he returned with a woman. She laughed very loudly. He wetted me, pushing his hands back into me. Soon I had eyes once more. She had curly hair, cut in a triangular shape, and long earrings. Little lines like cracked clay surrounded her mouth. She called him amour. He told her to take off her blouse, her bra. Stay still. You know you can take my picture and keep it next to you, amour. It's not the same. You're alive. Not for long. You're boring me to death. Don't be a bitch for once. She straightened, reached for her clothing. I'm not here to be abused. He removed his hands from me and walked toward her. What are you here for then? She didn't reply. He set his palm, still wet with remnants of me, onto her waist, drawing her close. She glared but didn't fight. He put a hand to her chest, molding it with his fingers. She closed her eyes, wrapped her legs around his body. She had hands too, and used them. How envious I was, watching in the many mirrors, how effortlessly they moved and twisted, a joint creation. On another day, alone, he finished me. When he brought her to face me, she didn't smile. My God, am I a monster to you? You don't understand what I'm trying to do. Embarrass me? I'm trying to make something different, not the sculptures we see in books. Something imperfect, alive, something elemental, a modern primitive. Don't ever tell anyone I posed for this. They fought, all their former arguments tame by comparison. He called her an old woman, past her prime. She laughed. He was 45 too. He yelled that she knew nothing of art. She said he was a dilettante who had done nothing but make one horrible statue. He hit her. She was quiet. On her lip, a crack bloomed red. She left. He looked at me a long time and then doused me with water. Once again, I was undone. Thank you.
So good. And Francis, I remember when you sent me this story, it was a very, I came across the email again recently, and it was a very brief note. You just said, a friend had read this and found it spooky and strange. So what were the origins of this story, and did it feel like a big break from your past work?
So the origin was, I was in Brazil for my father's birthday in January, which feels like 20 years ago now, but it was just this January. And mostly I spend it with my family on our farm. And then when we went back to the city, I went to this sculpture garden that I've been to ever since I was little. And it's always it's like a thrilling and really frightening place. Thrilling because I've never seen art like it. Like, it's just so unique. And most art, has a derivativeness to it. That's just the way that it is. But this is like nothing I've ever seen, but frightening because it's mostly women, and most of the women are in some way bloody or dismembered or suffering or just a body part. And this particular visit, I thought, what are they thinking? Like, what are these women thinking? And what would they say if they could speak about their creator and about themselves? And so I just kind of moved with that, and I kept hearing all these different voices, and I ultimately had to narrow down for the story, which statues speak and which don't. But my hope for it was that as the story progresses, you get more of the statues and the women's voices, and they become alive, and less of their kind of creator. And I don't know if I think my short stories are a little bit stranger than my novels. My novels are a little more straightforward, and I love kind of experimenting with short stories. So they're in the same vein as other stories that I've written, I think.
I think I've always found that you have this very unique talent for like the multi-voiced stories. And so when I was reading this for the first time, and you come through that first section and go to the next one, and I realized it was going to work in this way, I had this sort of frisson of like, ooh, wow, this is going to be amazing. So thank you so much. And we're going to move on to Patrick now. Patrick, if I recall correctly, I think George Saunders had referred me to Patrick's work like a decade ago. And George, I think George taught you. You were a protege at Syracuse. Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah, I was at Syracuse.
And he was
2007. Yeah.
Yeah, and Patrick is someone. If anyone talks to George and George starts to rhapsodize about one of his students, Patrick is a name you will hear. So then Patrick, and I don't know that he's ever referred me to somebody else. So Patrick, George thinks a lot of Patrick's work, and I think you'll see as you read his work why. So Patrick had sent me a story in right around then. It was for our fall 2011 issue called Lost Dog, which was in the Jeff McFetridge issue, which is just an electrifying story, and you should seek that out. And this story is another, as you'll see. So Patrick, can you give us a cut from your story in this issue, which is called "Oh Despot, My Despot"?
I can, and thanks so much for having me. Everybody can hear me clearly? Yes, all right, great. Yeah, and that experience was amazing. But I do believe you rejected maybe about 8 or 9 stories before that one.
Hey, we're trying to keep the mood happy here tonight, Patrick.
That is
it's
happy.
warm.
That
it's
is
all
happy
warm.
for...
Yeah, that's true. It's all warm feeling. Yeah.
Keep writing, keep sending.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sure you'll kind of figure out the inspiration for this pretty quickly, although it did take a fictional path that I was more happy with than the present state of the country. So, oh despot, my despot. I listen from my room below as my despot weeps in his above. Such torture. But what can I do for him? He does not respond well to leaving his comforts. Yet leave he must, or else be forced out, along with myself and the few loyal nationalists who remain in the great house, who keep guard and order. Though I suspect even these proud men and women will, in short time, dismiss their fidelity and make themselves subjects of documentaries, like so many before them, reclaiming their love of country in the face of our great despot's fall from grace. In the morning, he will address the nation one last time, and it has been my job these past few months to prepare him for this address. This, he's been told, will be his best chance to revive his legacy, to prove that he is healthy and fit, and leaving of his own volition. Oh, how did we get here, my despot? I ask in silence. Sometimes I do feel that our minds are one and we can hear the other without speaking. He would tell me that this is nonsense, but I perceive in his cries and his hacking coughs and midnight howls a man who blames only himself. Wasn't it you, my despot, who once said long ago that we must be as vigilant as the earthworm, so that when we are cut, we can regenerate still and dig and furrow and provide for our land? Yes, I grew up having misunderstood the true meaning of sacrifice, and I saw my parents give their lives away to ideas and thoughts and dreams. It took time for me to realize what it meant to be grateful. Many beatings and lectures, many sprints and cold showers. I was poor and flabby. You, my despot, made me rich and lean. Each night has been worse than the last. My despot can't sleep. I won't sleep, he cried. What terrible nightmares he has when he closes his eyes. Pieces of me began to fall off, Dalton. First my ears, then my nose, lips, arms, and nails. All that was left were my eyes, so that I could see how terrifying I looked. I try to calm him by bringing him warm milk and singing a lullaby, but he won't repose. He drinks his milk and paces around the bedroom. I begin to doze, and he wakes me with a kick to the gut. More milk, he demands. I can safely report that my despot's health is just fine, but he doesn't look healthy. We have attempted to address this with makeup under the eyes, yet my despot fusses and pushes away the stylist. Let them see, he shouts. Let them see what it takes to run this country. But your appearance, sir, I say. Yes, what about it? I am a man of peace, Dalton. Any man of peace looks like they've been kicked 60 ways to Sunday. Gandhi, Mandela, Jesus. So what if I'm beefy? Does that not mean I suffer? Oh, the level of hatred. Cause of such anxiety, such debilitating depression. Truly, my despot suffers to know there are those who want to see his eye sockets filled with maggots. They call me so many names, Dalton. They say I'm weak, and my teeth are crooked, and my head is full of mashed potatoes. Such indecency, sir. And blatantly inaccurate, Dalton. Feel my arms. No, not there, up higher. Hard as rock, sir, nothing short of impressive. And look here, perfectly straight, sir, not even an overbite. Shall I name every world leader in alphabetical order? What would be the point, sir? We have tried desperately to restore my despot to good physical shape. He has been on a strict diet of root vegetables and fish, but he cannot go a day without peanut butter cups. And without peanut butter cups, he's not very nice. As usual, though, my despot never ceases to amaze. Just last week, spurred by ridicule, he called for me to put on my jogging suit and come to his room. We must get fit, he cried. You're the boy for the job, Dalton. I need to build my glutes. In my heyday, I had such glorious glutes. I noticed that my despot was wearing shorts that must have dated from the era of those glorious glutes. Now, however, his backside was rather large and dimply. The mustard-colored fabric barely disguised his dingle, the middle seam splitting his crab apples. Did you know that I was once a very good athlete, Dalton? I was considered one of the fastest men on earth. I think I knew that, sir. You think? Where's your sense of history? You watch, Dalton. First, we performed knee bends, back bends, and light squats. Then I suggested we jog through the great house. Do you know how many hallways there are, Dalton? That I don't, sir. They are endless. Yes, sir. My despot turned our amble into a trot, taunting me by galloping backward and squealing. Then he began to sprint, his glutes bouncing mightily. A moment later, he was doubled over. Oh, something terrible has happened, he said. That night, I sat on a stool beside my despot as he soaked in the tub. The doctor had instructed him to spend 15 minutes in warm water and 15 minutes out, and to keep doing so until his crab apples unwound. When the first 15 minutes were up, my despot called for his robe, and I draped it over his shoulders. As he reached for his dingle, I reminded him of the doctor's orders. Let them unwind on their own, sir, I said. Yes, okay, he said. He soaked and stood, soaked and stood. Can you play an instrument, Dalton, he asked. I can blow on a harmonica fairly well, sir. I mean a real instrument, Dalton. No, sir, I don't have much of a knack for music. I haven't heard music in so long. I just remembered that. I wonder what happened. Sir, I said, looking down, they've unwound. So they have, he said, and tied his robe. Much to look forward to, Dalton. Yes, sir. He walked through the doors to his bedroom. Sleep well, sir, I said. I held a moment, hoping he heard me. If this document ever becomes an historical record, please don't think that I'm speaking badly about my despot's nature. For even with his balls tied in a knot, the strength and certainty of his eyes equip him with immeasurable powers. He has a handsome face with a sharp chin, and by the evening, when the stubble has grown back, he takes on the appearance of a rugged gentleman, adept at shooting clay pigeons. His very presence commands attention from the vilest visions in our nation. He walks and points, and where his eyes go, so do yours, and then back to his, as now he is looking at you, the way he does from the banners draped along the crumbling buildings in the city center. Even half of his face covers a good deal of crumble. And then he is passing out of the once quiet room, leaving it in a state of confusion, unrest, and quickening instability. I've seen how people follow my despot as though in a trance, up to the barricades, to the great fleet of armored cars where he turns and waves, ushering them back into the wild. You cannot disremember that glorious day years ago when we stood at attention and listened over the caws of crows and the laughter and screaming as his voice boomed through the loudspeakers bolted to the trees in the green square. You cannot disremember the next day either, and the sight of a man being dragged by his feet from the back of a chuck wagon through the same square now smattered with bird poop. Boy, how times have and have not changed. My despot closes each address with the same righteous sincerity. What more can I give to you than my heart, my soul, my life? And we stand there silently as though listening to a prayer. But now my despot seems to be increasingly unpopular with his people. What can I do, he exclaimed once, after we had watched a slanderous comedy skit on television that showed a much smaller and chubbier man using a bridge made up of his own constituents to cross a gator-infested tributary. They don't know the man I was before I was the man I am. What words, I thought, what humility. Dalton, are you aware that I'm an orphan? No, sir, because I'm not. Still, I have great empathy for orphans. My parents never knew how to nurture me, but I miss them, Dalton. I miss summer. I miss the ocean. I miss the porch and seeing my trunks hang over the railing, dripping at the bottoms as they dried in the sun. I miss the smell of peaches. And by God, I've never even liked peaches all that much. What a world my memory is. What a muscle my mind. How long must we suffer in its spontaneous revolution? Sir, this is the raw stuff. This is what you need to share with the people. No, Dalton. Tell the people your private thoughts and they'll ache from hope. Oh, but he aches. He weeps for days past and days to come. He weeps sometimes without knowing why. Dalton, he cries, my poor eyes won't ever dry. Sir, my hands are full of used tissues. Kids are dying. Yes, and grown men and women too. Grown men and women and kids. Entire families, sir. So many tragedies, Dalton. How much empathy can one have? It's a great feat to summon all that empathy, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I mean, when I read that story, we've read a fair bit of sort of taking shots at some of at sort of our overbronzed malcontent in the White House, but this take on this psychotic moment that we're in was just one of the most brilliant I'd read, and even as it's fiction. And so I was curious, how did you think to kind of turn your gaze from kind of the easy target of this person to the enablers and the sycophants, and how did you capture the essence of our current despot while also rendering yours wholly distinct?
Well, I mean, I had that line for a long time, probably about 3 years. I listened from my room below as my despot weeps and his above. So I like the idea of someone just listening to him crying. And I don't know if it was the New York Times or the New Yorker. They ran a story a few years ago about how he was lonely in the White House. And I thought that was really funny because it's not really his house at all. And if he's lonely, it would be him being lonely from himself. And it was really strange. It's that weird, strange, double thing. And so, but to make it not too on the nose, I had to not really think of him. I had to think more of Dalton, of the character who has put all his beliefs into this person and trusted that things will get better, and is trying to ride it out in a way, and also coming to terms with his own what is the aftermath, And so and then it was just scenes after that. I had a whole campaign thing. The story had grown to 15,000 words at one point, and there were novelistic ideas, and I just kept coming back to these two characters together And as the story goes about, he keeps trying to bring the despot milk, and the milk keeps cooling each time he does it. And so it gives an excuse for them to talk and reflect on how bad he's run the country. So
yeah, and I mean this sort of tone. Yeah, sorry. I think that they're yeah.
It grew more into a fictional world of my own that I could deal with, because if you start taking in too much, it just becomes overwhelming and becomes fake, false to fiction, false to my own storytelling. So.
Yeah, and I guess that I mean the two things. I mean the story is like just brilliantly written. It's just so sharp. I think the relationship between the two of them is endlessly compelling, and how it sort of tips into almost like there's so much feeling that it almost like tips into like a romantic love. And I think that the psychology of, there's so much focus on this person in the center, but I mean, the psychology of the inner layer around him is just so much more fascinating. And I feel like this story took on something that is already becoming just like well-trodden ground, to the point that like you're kind of seeking escape from it, and reflects it in a way that feels like totally new, and in a way that you can kind of approach it and not feel like you're gonna sort of vomit. So thank you for that, Patrick, for doing that.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna turn now to Daniel. And while this is Daniel's the first time Daniel and I have worked together, our relationship actually goes back the longest of everyone here, at least in spirit. As I'd mentioned to Daniel, when I was first interviewing for this job, which was back in the spring of 2002, I spent my first interview talking at length about a completely eviscerating story of Daniel's that appeared in the magazine the previous fall that was called I Run Every Day. It was in the fall 2001 issue, so it was before I joined the magazine. And it was later in his collection, Orientation and Other Stories, which is, you should order it tonight. It's incredible. And so when I got the job 18 and a half years ago, I commenced my pursuit of Daniel for another story. There was one, Shakers, which I like a decade ago, which I think that I think I'd sent a contract on it, and it was like, Daniel's like, he'd agreed to let it go somewhere else like 2 hours earlier. It's about an earthquake. It's also in that collection. So it just, and so when Daniel wrote me with this story in May, he's like, well, take your time with this one. And so it only took, I guess, just shy of 20 years for Daniel to reciprocate my interest. So here we are 2 decades later, Daniel. And let's not let another 20 pass before we do this again, please. So Daniel's story is the final story in the issue. It's called Leave No Trace. And can you bring us home with that one, Daniel?
Yeah, sure. And Michael, I just want to thank you for contacting me once a year for about 15 years to ask me if I had anything. I finally did, and I'm real pleased. This story's in 3 parts. I'm going to read all of the first part, and then we're just going to barely dip into part 2. Okay. Leave No Trace. 1. When he was 6 years old, little Rutger's mother was killed by an exceptionally rare and virulent spinal cancer, and his father, a benign and devoted alcoholic who embraced the memory of her ghastly suffering to the exclusion of everything and everyone else until he himself died a half-decade later, took his only child aside the day after they had buried her and told him this: "Everything goes, little buddy. Your mother is gone, I'll be gone someday, and you'll be gone too. Life is a slog, one cold, dark, slippery uphill slog. There'll be a crack of light or two to see your way. That's called hope. And a handhold here and a toehold there, that's mercy. But the light That'll wink out and you'll be in the dark again. And the holds, they'll crumble and down you go. So crush hope. Let hope die. And mercy, well, don't quit your day job. And what about love? I loved your mother. You loved her too. We watched her suffer and die, and boom, she's feeding the worms now, and we're alone. Love is pain, little buddy. So harden your heart. Take that precious, meaty, beady little muscle of yours and turn it into a fist of stone. Everything goes. When I go, the only mark I'll leave is in here. Little Rutger's father touched his son's head, surmising the traces of his mark inside with gentle fingertips. And when you go, that's all she wrote. No memory of me left at all. Boom. So keep your head down. Sit in the back row and don't raise your hand. Play dumb. Avoid the spotlight. Don't make a fuss. Bring a book and just wait in line. Don't answer the door. Don't order the special. Don't travel. Don't ask her out. Don't color outside the lines. Expect nothing. Don't reach. Don't strive. Don't try. Just be. Be invisible. Be smoke. Be a ghost. Leave no trace. And so little Rutger didn't, or at least he didn't mean to. 2. Rutger is 11 years old, sent to Uncle Willie and Aunt Midge, already in their late 60s and active retirees, early risers, weekly players of tennis and four-handed bridge, intrepid solvers of 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles, hardy day hikers and trusty community volunteers, and avid gardeners of tomatoes and beets and kale. They are always doing things, shoulders to wheels, noses to grindstones, and all that. What do you like to do? They ask the boy. He shrugs and says, everything. And he does do everything. He gets a paper route, babysits for several families in their church, plays junior league soccer, picks up litter from playgrounds and highway medians with his Boy Scout troop. He takes on household and gardening tasks as Uncle Willie's eyes and Aunt Midge's joints incrementally deteriorate. They teach him how to ride a bike, fly a kite, tread water, bake bread, fold hospital corners, rewire a lamp. He learns to sew on a button, use a compass, measure twice and cut once, read a night sky, bone a chicken, even play bridge, sometimes sitting in as an emergency fourth. He is adequate at everything he does. The papers are mostly delivered on time and the ball usually moved downfield. The babysat children are safe, though bored, the buttons sewn on secure but crooked, the merit badges earned if just barely. He always loses at bridge, yet sometimes respectably so. He approaches every new and untried thing dubiously as if it were primed with explosives. Only bread making alters this affect, the steps of a recipe imbuing him with a semblance of confidence. Bewildered by this nephew out of the blue, Uncle Willie and Aunt Midge are, though well-intentioned and devoted, intensely awkward caretakers. They pat him on the back or tousle his hair and tell him that he's a good boy. You're a good boy, Rutger. Aside from these clumsy tendernesses, nothing is amiss in the home of Uncle Willie and Aunt Midge, bought decades ago in a now upscale peninsula community with a robust tax base and well-funded schools teeming with solicitous teachers and counselors perpetually after Rutger about his passion. What is your passion, Rutger? What are you interested in? He shrugs and says, nothing, which is not entirely true, but the investment in his success from Mrs. Hines and Mr. Cockrell and all the others torments him until he finds respite with Mr. Rosa, who teaches geometry and algebra trig and is serenely indifferent to his students' passions. While Rutger enjoys the methodical process of solving for X or proving the congruence of angles A and B, His X is often wrong, and the logic of his proofs easily unraveled. Mr. Rosa gives him C's and D's, and by the end of his first year of high school, Rutger, to his great relief, is officially pegged an underachiever and off the hook investment and success-wise. He avoids the locker room bullies and the cafeteria cliques by allying with the theater students, and now identified and dismissed as a theater fag, is mostly left alone. He works in the fly loft, climbing ladders and traversing catwalks, belaying and tying off ropes that move light rigs up and down and swing sceneries in and out. For 3 years, he watches on the stage below a girl named Nina, willing her to look up. She is Ado Annie in Oklahoma and Emily in our town. She is Nurse Kelly in Harvey and Lotus Blossom in the tea house of the August moon. After high school, Uncle Willie asks, "What now, Rutger?" And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, this is like a first chapter of a novel in terms of the emotional content of the story. And I do find this story so affecting in this moment. I mean, it's Ernest's plea that even in isolation, each one of us matters. We're each tied to one another. We each leave a legacy. It's just so epic. I mean, where did this start?
I had always wanted to see if I could, this is like decades ago, I'd always wanted to see if I could test the limits of brevity and write a complete life in like 10 pages. I just always wanted to do that from birth to death. And then I kind of left that aside, set that aside. And then a couple of years ago, I started reading A Simple Heart by Flaubert. And for some reason, that story triggered me wanting to do this again, to tell a life, much like, what's her name? I forget her name, where she is on the sidelines and all opportunity kind of passes her by. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to tell a story about somebody who doesn't matter. And then this whole thing about memory comes up and takes over the story. And to be honest, I don't remember when that came up. I don't remember when I thought about doing that or how I made the decision to do that, but I did. And after this character dies, it's not a spoiler. After he dies, part 3 is just how everybody remembers him.
And without giving any spoilers, but I mean, the final moment is just dazzling. When you, without mentioning what happens, when you came upon that as sort of a last line, did that feel sort of dazzling in that moment when you conceived of it? I'm guessing yes.
When I found that whole, the situation that arises that ends the story, I came across it in the New York Times about a year ago.
Oh, wow.
And I just went, whoa, how can I not use that? So yeah, that was one of those rare cliched moments where inspiration hits and it goes boom, you know, and it's rarely like that, inspiration. That's a cliche, but that actually happened with that. So yeah.
I mean, that felt, it was like a perfectly clean landing to a very difficult trick. Because going through
Thank you.
It was incredible. So to all the millions of folks out there, I think what you may not realize, given their respective histories that I've outlined for each of these writers, which I guess the shortest is about a decade, is that this is the very first time, like tonight, that any of us have ever spoken. We've never met priorly. We've never talked on the phone throughout all those years and decades and stories. And I think to some extent that's a function of the magazine's location on the West Coast. We're not really at the center of sort of the culture of industry of writing. And so our entire relationships have been conducted via email, and yet, I mean, I think through each of your work, going through the process of edits, seeing how you develop ideas and you solve problems, I feel like I very much know you. I mean, Frances and I are on each other's holiday gift card lists. So I look forward to seeing her lovely family every year. And so as we're thinking about this, I mean, I feel like this sort of our mode of collaboration in a way kind of presages this current mode of creative production in COVID. I mean, this necessary cooperation from very distributed locations, these sort of emotional and human connections that you make, but being conducted remotely. And so I just wanted to talk a bit through that process with you all. And kind of the development of these stories. I mean, and I'm going to just sort of open it up to the three of you, but these stories begin in isolation, each in a room. You send the story to me. We begin this kind of, mutual rally. And so what's that experience like for you? Having this thing that is all yours, sending it to somebody else and having someone else's, sort of metaphorically letting somebody else into that room, kind of opening up space for somebody else. I mean, like once this very private thing becomes a shared thing. Any of you? I mean, I was just going to open it up to all three. I thought you guys were all going to start talking over each other.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think a lot about how we, I think what's so important about a relationship between an editor and a writer is trust, and how we're able to develop trust and kind of come back to work together again and again, without ever meeting one another, without ever having like those normal ways that you go out for a drink with somebody.
Well, Michael, I can jump in. It's always been that way for me. I mean, I've before I moved from San Francisco, I mean, after I moved from San Francisco, I moved to a small town in northern Idaho. I've been here for 18 years. So just about every relationship I've had editing a story has been the way that we've done it. I don't think I've ever gone out for drinks with an editor.
Next time I'm in Moscow, it's happening.
You'll be the first. But I mean, for me, the whole notion of being in isolation, I mean, it's COVID is kind of everybody doing what I've been doing for quite a while. So just scrivening out these stories. So it isn't that odd for me. It isn't that odd to find I think a great level of trust in somebody whose voice you've never heard. I mean, that's happened to me a couple of times. So.
Yeah, it's funny. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, for me, I just felt like there's a writer who he passed away recently, Lee K. Abbott, and I remember him saying, it was like a lecture he was giving, and he said, "Have any of you wanted to cut off your arm? Have any of you read a story that you cut your own arm off to write?" And I was like, "Man, that is so intense, And then I asked him like later what he meant about that, and he's like, "Well, every time I write a story where a piece of me feels like it's gone, then that's gone." And that's what a real story is. And so the times that I felt like I wrote that story, I sent them to Michael, so he can, and he's got a great way of feeling where you're coming from. And that's got to be so hard for an editor when so many different voices are coming at you at the same time. So it's almost a question for you, like, how do you handle all those different voices and feel like you're a part of that writer, like you can understand where that writer is going and what they're trying to accomplish, and also enjoy it, because all three of these stories are all different and they're all really enjoyable. Like this is a magazine, but it feels like a book I would buy. I mean, they're all so intense and big stories. So it's a real accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a response to what's in the story. I mean, I think I'm just a close reader, and I think what I'm always looking for are stories that can kind of like, they're so immersive that they can skip the mediation of the intellect and kind of affect me as a reader, and I think other readers emotionally, before I can even sort of logic out why. And I think that film can do that because it has sort of so many tools with which to work, and music can do it. There's something about literature where it's such a logical exercise of interpreting shapes into letters, connecting them into words, into sentences, that there's so much sort of logic happening and putting together and reasoning through, that when something can make you feel something before you're even ready to feel it. And if somebody stopped you and said, why do you feel that way? And you couldn't say why, like that to me is a really incredible story. And I think to create, it's like something that's so immersive that you forget you're reading. And I always think of it sort of like you sort of transcend the imposition of the page. And I think writers that really, the stories that really work, it's writers that focus not on the relationship between the writer and the work, but the reader and the work, and really trying to develop that. I think I talk about these things like leaving room for the reader to participate in the understanding of the story, the ways that you can catalyze rather than describing an emotion, that you can sort of describe a character, put that character in a certain situation, and I know that character well enough to know the emotional distress that's on that person. And so in a way, like as a reader, I sort of empathetically fill that in. And I do that by drawing up my own emotions, and the stories become so much richer to, and in a way, it's like, it's not your story because you wrote it, it's my story when I'm reading it. And I think that's why, I think, and you guys working with me, I can, I think, be a little, I don't know what the word, sort of exacting even about things like, a period here or whatever. And it's because once you create that fugue state in a story, like I never want to break it. And if there's like one misspelling, or if there's anything that reminds you that you're reading, it's like trying to create that state and then suspend that state. And any little sort of infelicity can just remind somebody like, like why is that word capitalized after a colon or something? And you just to kind of break all that away. That's kind of the stuff that I love. And I feel like I read that. I think that the stuff that stands out, I still remember, Francis, when you sent The Disappearance of Luisa Porto, so that was 15 years ago, which is a story about this this young girl from a well-to-do family who disappears. And it was, reading that the first time, it felt very emotional. Is that something like, Francis, when you're working, are you thinking are you thinking about it in that way, like almost approaching your own work as a reader, like thinking about like leaving that room for somebody to sort of like come into the story and have like personal reactions to it?
Well, first, I just want to say about the isolation piece, something that Daniel said, where you, Michael, kind of check in and say, do you have anything? And I appreciate that so much, because even though I don't have something, it's like, well, somebody cares, like Michael, who I deeply respect and feel like is the best editor ever. Like, he cares enough to take me out of that isolation and say, like, I would like to read what you're working on. And that is just like a rope for me. Many times it has just been a rope out of kind of that deep isolation. So I really appreciate that and that aspect of our relationship. But in terms of, I feel like every story teaches me what it needs. And so I try to go into it and I want to disappear as the writer, and I don't want to pirouette, and I don't want to do things that don't serve the story in terms of language or plot. And most stories take me a really long time to write, I think, because of that, because of I need to take my own self and ego out of it and really focus on the characters. And that's kind of what I hear first, are these kind of the voices of the specific people that I'm writing about. And then I kind of find an entryway in. And then I just really deeply hope that because I'm connecting so much in that character's point of view, that the reader will also connect, and it'll be a relationship between them, and I'm completely out of the picture. And that was always my hope.
And I'm curious too, I mean, not to get too sort of process oriented, but you know, you and I now have worked on 4 stories together. I mean, I kind of know how I work. You know, which I think can be somewhat intense sometimes. How, like when you're working through edits, like how do you know? Because I mean, as much, all 3 of you, I think what's really distinguished, sort of, I don't know, sort of like special about your work is you occupy kind of every sentence of it. So when you're receiving edits from somebody, like how do you sort of negotiate that process? How do you know, like you kind of take what's good, discard what's not so good, but maybe take a lesson about it, that something needs to be fixed, while always sort of maintaining your sense of like where you want the story to go? Because I think that's difficult for a lot of like emerging writers. Like, how do you take, like, someone's going to read the thing, and like, how do you take that advice and make the story better, but that it's still yours?
I mean, for me, I just, oh, sorry, Francis.
No, go ahead, Patrick. No, that's okay.
I just, I read and revise my own stuff so much that when I do send it to an editor and like Michael, and he comes back with a bunch of edits, I'm like, how did he find these things? Like, how did he find these things? You know? And I'm always amazed that because I spend so much time revising and obsessing about each line, and then I'm always surprised that someone can see, you know, a step ahead or something like that. And that the section that I read, you know, just for some insight into the edit of this story, was that it's funny to have an editor and you write a piece about, you know, a despot's crab apples, and so I wrote that, and he had made it so that you didn't exactly know that he wound his balls up while he was jogging. You find that out a beat later, and before you had found that out right away. And I was like, and that was the whole thing was so funny to me that is something that we're going back and forth on, is an edit like that, where let's leave. And I think Michael put in the line, let's leave some mystery up to the reader about this guy's balls. So you know, something like that is fun, but it also shows you the level of, if you're trying to do something comedic too, which I think is really hard to do, balance the comedy and the dark and the light. You really need a strong reader that understands that's what you're trying to do. And so that was really great with Michael. So.
I think so much of it is about trust, and like trusting the person that you're working with, obviously. And so, I mean, with Michael, whenever you send me edits, I truly trust that you are understanding where I'm trying to go with the story, and really respecting that, and are a partner in helping it get better. And so I feel this great sense of relief when I send you things, because I'm just like, it's going to get so much better now. But I think ultimately it's a relationship that takes time to build, and also knowing your own work enough, and knowing kind of how you want a story to transform, how much are the edits going to transform it, and where do you need it to go. And that's just understanding yourself as a writer and the story itself.
Yeah, I mean, I always, go ahead, Daniel, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I knew that we clicked because I love catalogs. I love lists and things and attributes, and I love the pile up of just all kinds of bits and pieces of the world in a story. I love doing it again and again. You love catalogs too, but you love shorter ones. But you still love them. So that's what that was telling.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times, and I guess this is sort of top of mind because I was just doing a class last week, and this question always comes up about, like, you know, I send my work out to people and I get feedback, and then I just think, like, what do I, like, do I take everything? Kind of, what do I do? And I always feel like the stuff that, as a writer, you know your work better than anyone else, and like the stuff that the editor points out that you kind of already knew is the worthwhile stuff. Like the stuff that, you know, there's a lot of parts you're kind of papering over a corner, you're kind of, it's a little loose paint in this aspect. But the stuff that like really resonates, and you just think like, yeah, I mean, I kind of knew that, and I just needed somebody to tell me that, you know, the 30th time that I tried to rework this isn't quite working. I always feel like in my own stuff, those are the things to take. But to always remember that, you know, you're the one who's lived with the story the most. You know what you want to do. And when somebody's taking a story, it's because of what's there. And to, you know, to hold fast to where you were going to take it. And I want to open up I don't know exactly how to manage this, Peter, but if we could open up for questions for people.
Yeah.
If anybody's out there has questions.
Who wants to ask, you know, if you go down to your dashboard, you can use the chat function. And incidentally, that's where you can also find the links to buy the issue, but also you can subscribe to Zoetrope. So keep that in mind, folks. So here we go. There's a question from Neil. Michael, now that you've published one of Daniel's stories, what other writers are you hoping to finally publish in Zoetrope for the first time?
That's a good question. Who are some people? I mean, I feel like who's someone that I'm trying to publish right now? I mean, I don't know. Like, I think that, you know, we get so many submissions, and I feel like the people I want to publish, I don't, you know, this is going to seem like a cop out, but it's true. I don't know their work yet. I think a lot of the people that, like, if I could make a list of people I've wanted to work with, I've sort of worked with them. I mean, I could say, like, you know, I think Patrick would kick, like, I mean, I'm thinking of somebody like George. George Saunders is someone who I respect incredibly. I've been with him. He taught a workshop. We used to lead a writing workshop in Belize every year, and George would come down one time. And at the time, he was he'd just written a piece for like GQ on Dubai. Do you remember this piece, Patrick?
Yeah,
it was like in 2000. It was the Katrina year.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what had really impressed me about George was that, I don't know if any of you guys saw this piece. I think it was in GQ, and it was basically George wandering around Dubai. And in his sort of blue collar work ethic, he took offense at the fact that tourists, he was staying at like the barge, and he took offense at the fact that tourists had to pay to come visit the barge. And so he was in the lobby, and he met this couple from somewhere in the UK, and they were there on their honeymoon, I think, or anniversary. And so he invited them up to his room, which he wasn't supposed to do. And he like gave them the robes and like everything, like whatever was not nailed down in the suite, he gave to them. And then he was just like charging it all to GQ. And so he'd written this thing, and we're in Belize, and it's the year of Katrina. And I don't remember if you guys remember that year. There was also a storm that came through Houston. There was just a lot of chaos. There were storms coming through. Reception was terrible. And there was this fact checker at GQ that was tracking George down, asking him if he could get a contact for this couple so he could call them and like confirm certain aspects of the story. And I imagine, like, you know, it's kind of like an overeager 23-year-old or whatever. And I kept saying to George at the time, like, just like the hoops that you're jumping through for this, like, are not worth it. Like, just tell this guy, like, talk to your editor and tell this guy to stand down. And he's such a sincere guy and so dedicated to what he was doing, and never would. And I always found it really sweet. And I always wanted to work with him, but I also kind of feel like, you know, George is, I don't know, like, if you want to find George's work, you can find George's work. He did, and I think I'm sort of going on a tangent here, but on the subject of editing, there was something fascinating. If you guys ever get to take a class with George, you should. We talked quite a bit about editing. He talked about, he may have told this story in your class, Daniel, about when, I think it was his first story that he published in the New Yorker, which was in the late 80s. And it was when Bill Buford was there. And so Bill sent him edits, and Bill's edits were cut 12 lines. And so then George is like, this is a bizarre directive, like, but okay, I'll cut 12 lines. And he was assuming it had something to do with the copy fitting. And so he's like, oh yeah, those are probably good, 12 good lines to cut. And he sent it back to Bill. And then Bill sends it back to him and said, cut 14 lines. And so then George is like, this just seems so arbitrary, but like, and so uninspiring, but fine, I'll cut 14 lines. So he cuts 14 lines. This goes on. And George is getting more and more frustrated, but feeling like the story is getting better and better. And so finally he said to Bill, he's like, I need something from you. Like, why did you buy this? Like, this feels like this ridiculous process. And Bill's response was, I read the first sentence and I liked it. And I read the second one and I liked it. And I read the third one. And then before I found a sentence I didn't like, the story was over. And it's just, he has a great way of demystifying the act of writing. And the sort of the sense of wandering in the woods, which he takes a very kind of like, I don't know, like a plumbing approach to, like a blue collar approach of like, there's a certain way that these things work. And so I guess I've always wanted to kind of work with him in some way, but again, like, he's somebody you can find anywhere. And I think that what's exciting for me is just that I'm sort of getting work all the time and having the experience of like reading Patrick's story, Lost Dog, or, reading I Run Every Day, or reading The Disappearance of Lisa Porto, and just reading something that is unlike anything else I've read. And it's like that sense that there's still surprise in the world. Like when somebody turns you on to like a movie, like if you've never seen Kelly Reichardt's films, or someone turns you on to a band and you hear the first record and you're like, oh my gosh, the fact that this like richness has always been out there and I'm just discovering it now. And there's so much to discover. Like, that's what's so exciting to me. So like when these stories come across the transom, it's just, it's thrilling. So I think, Neil, like the next one of those that happens, that's the person I want to publish. That was the end of the answer.
See, I have
if there was an answer in there.
I have a question from Jennifer. Is it a challenge to create cohesion between the substance of the stories and the guest editor's creative vision?
You want to feel that one, Manjula?
Sure, yeah. The way we work is generally I sort of am working on the design with the guest designer while Michael's editing the stories at the same time. I will actually say it's surprisingly not challenging. We really view the guest design and the artwork as being sort of its own narrative. One thing we're always very clear with when we invite these amazing artists to design is, we're not asking you to illustrate these stories. The artwork is not an illustration of what's happening on the text pages. Rather, we view it as its sort of own narrative that provides different beats and rhythms throughout the whole book of the magazine. And for that reason, I think, and I should add that some of the guest designers are really interested in how the images match with the stories or don't match, and some could care less. So it's always a fun thing to sort of learn who is into that and who is not into that. And there's no wrong or right. It's just, how people prefer to work and what their artistic process is like. And for a lot of our guest designers, they're not graphic designers, they're artists in other realms. So it's a new process for them as well to sort of figure out how to design a magazine made of paper, pictures, and words. I think I will say that, there is a process at some point in the layout process. there's sometimes a slight bit of finessing or pushing that the guest designer will do, or that I'll notice, where we'll be like, you know, ooh, if this image followed that story, there would be like a nice sort of punctuation there, you know, there's a resonance. But I find it always really amazing to work with guest designers and see how the images resonate against the text as a surprise. You know, whenever you pair images with narrative, new things come up. And I think that's actually one of the really exciting things about the guest design, is it lends this whole other sort of dimension to the fiction.
Yeah, and I think what's really exciting about, like, what's sort of endlessly interesting about the magazine for us is the way that you can kind of approach anybody. I mean, from the design side, you know, musicians, filmmakers, anybody, and from the with writers, kind of anyone that we want to work with, and you just sort of see how people solve problems, which is always really exciting, and see how people think about things. Like, I mean, I was just thinking as a recent example, and maybe somewhat of a pedestrian example, but it was revelatory to me that there was with our summer issue, which the musician Kate LeBon designed, and there was Rebecca Miller had a story in the issue, and there was like this image that was just like, it distilled the story. Like there was just like this perfect kind of aesthetic manifestation of just like the sensibility and the feeling behind the story. And I was very keen on this image,
As
and
was I.
Monville had suggested it, and Kate had said, like, it's just too, like, there was like, she wanted something that felt like a little more angular, and it was just sort of an interesting thing. Like, yeah, that's, you know, like, where I was looking for a certain kind of synchronicity, she is too, but it's just a different kind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and at the time she explicitly used the word weird, which is kind of,
Yeah,
if you know her, you know, appropriate for some of her visual aesthetic as a musician and auditory aesthetic. And she said, you know, every sort of image in the magazine and every juxtaposition of images in the magazine is a little bit off and a little bit weird or angular, as Michael said, I think is a nice way to say it. Except this one that like perfectly illustrates and introduces this one story. And, you know, we didn't use the sort of apt image. We used the image she wanted to use, which I think sort of drew it added a level of darkness to the story that I think was actually really interesting.
and if I can tell, on the subject of musicians from Wales who designed the magazine, if I can tell a quick anecdote about it, just a really sort of a fun design experience. This was back in 2009, I think, and the musician PJ Harvey was she was turning 40, and I'd read an interview, and this will just sort of give a sort of life cycle of a design process. So I'd read an interview, and she was asked if she had any regrets, and she said that her one regret was that she'd given up her art practice. So she'd gone to her visual art practice. She'd gone to art school studying sculpture and drawing. She was playing in bands at the time. Touring took over, and it just was inconvenient, and she just stopped making visual art. And so I read, and then this is kind of how these things will start. It's like, wow, that's sort of interesting. Like, I love PJ Harvey. Like, what would she make? And so then, like, scouring the internet, trying to figure out, like, can we find evidence of anything she's ever made? And we couldn't. And so I'd kind of talked to some different friends and found a friend who knew her, who could advance an invitation. And so I'd written her. She did not at the time, so this was 2009, 2010, she did not have email. She had a fax machine. And so you would like you would fax her letters. And so so what I'd said to her was like, you know, I don't know what you do, but what I can offer you is like a deadline to make work and a forum for the work when it's done. So, and she just made the record White Chalk, which I really love. So she agreed readily. I didn't think she would. And so we were working on the issue, and the work that she made is incredible. It's like these really beautiful drawings incredible draftsmanship. And so as she was we put out the issue. Immediately she was contacted by galleries in London, Paris, New York. She put on shows, and she got representation, became a practicing visual artist again. And at the time she was recording the record Let England Shake, and she's talked a lot about in interviews about she was putting together the issue, making the record, making artwork was pulling her back to this like time in her life in her 20s when she was very political. It really, each process like was feeding the other one. And so then the record came out and, it won the Mercury Prize. And it was just like this really fun, like, I don't know, like this wonderful, like ripple from this little pond, like pebble that you throw into a pond, just reading this interview. And the other thing that's really inspiring, like with that, is that we're this relatively small magazine, and like it doesn't sort of redound to PJ Harvey's fame to like do this magazine, but it was just like she was excited, like even at this point in her life, like she was excited about an opportunity to do something creative, to challenge herself, to take something on that felt like a little bit scary. And for us, it's just like really rewarding to be part of that process. And I think that's sort of, that's why I've been here for 18 and a half years. And do we have other questions out there? I don't want to keep everybody all night. I'm also in this is the room that my kids are going to sleep in. So I'm gonna have to give it up to them soon.
I think we are so blessed to be at the nexus of the literary arts, of music, of film. I mean, both City Lights and Zoetrope. And tonight has been such a pleasure, just, hearing these wonderful readings, but also hearing about how you do this. And I just love it. And, I just want to thank you again, neighbor.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I
so
think that
fun.
Peter and I, so we work like a block apart. And I always think back on this, and I've actually thought back on this during the COVID time, Peter, running into you, and you're like putting together like the Peter does this Dada Festival in San Francisco, and we were talking right outside of Mr. Bing's, and we were talking about how you encounter so many people in your life like via email, but that Peter and I, like, we would just bump into each other physically, randomly, frequently, and how that was just such a pleasant part of being in North Beach in San Francisco. When I think about San Francisco and all that's happening there, I think that, one of my first sentimental thoughts is like walking by City Lights when I'm going up to meet somebody for a drink at Vesuvio and looking in the window and seeing Peter and Paul in the balcony above the reading room and, stopping in to say hi. So we have such warm feelings for you guys, and please do. City Lights is such an institution. And it's difficult for so many literary, I think City Lights, is one that people kind of take for granted, and they feel like it's always been here and it always will be here. These organizations cannot survive, especially now, without people's support. So please go to City Lights, order things, buy things. It's such an important place for, I think, like the national cultural identity. And then just on a very real level, when you go to City Lights, like Peter, you've been there for how long? How many years?
Long enough to know better.
My favorite story sorry, go ahead.
26 years.
26 years Peter's been there. My favorite, one of my favorite stories about City Lights is the fact that Paul Yamazaki has been there since 1970. He's coming up on his 50-year anniversary, and he got a job the day he got out of jail because he needed a job, like something to do with his release or something like that. And like Lawrence brought him in, and these guys are institutions. I think it's funny that like Stacey Lewis, when she was having her like 20th anniversary there or something, and she was like the young kid on the block. You guys have all been there forever. So please support City Lights. And I just want to say before we go that we do have we're offering a discount code, stay home, one word, a discount of 15% off any subscription if you go to the website. The magazine sells out quickly. If you want to get it, I would order it. I think we don't have tons once we ship them out to subscribers, so definitely order it. If in this spirit of coming together, you can always order a few extra if you like. Send them to your friends, enemies, exes, never wases.
Come by the store.
Um,
Got plenty at the
Yeah,
store.
go, go to the
Buy them,
store.
yeah.
So, but thank you so much. And I want to thank Francis, Patrick, and Daniel. Manjula and I have talked about this. I've talked to my wife about it, that this, I think in this difficult time, this issue is really special in not only for the work, but just because you guys, like every interaction with the three of you was just so pleasant and buoying to me. I mean, I love all three of you. I loved every back and forth. And Kelly too was just so fabulous. So it was just like this, it's like this issue, I mean, it's yellow. It is sort of like in a dark time, like this battery of warm feelings. So I hope everybody kind of experiences that too as they read it. So thank you all, three of you, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Michael.
much. It's
Thank
so
you,
great
Peter.
to meet all of you virtually.
Yes. Yes.
And on the other side of this ridiculousness, we're all getting together.
Yes.
Hope so.
Yeah.
In Moscow, Idaho. We're coming there, Daniel.
No, I'll come there.
Okay, come here.
All right.
All right, thank you so much, guys.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Be
Bye.
well.
Thank
Well,
you.
Hope to see you all
Peter.
Take care,
soon.
everyone.